Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Emily, with the great news coming up on the Ohio legalization that's on the ballot in November, I do want to give the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol all the credit for getting cannabis legalization on the ballot. I know they had to do a lot of work. We're going to talk about all that work that they've done, and it's fantastic that they've gotten it this far. But I was thinking, maybe, just maybe, this has a little bit to do with Dave Chappelle being an Ohio resident right now.
Yep. We know he tokes, so this could be a good thing.
He's been in Ohio for a while. I remember when that kind of came out, and it seems so odd. And I know he's talked about, why he likes being in Ohio. But I mean, if he's there, it can only help, right?
Yeah. Actually, you just reminded me back when do you remember when he was on Comedy Central? Obviously,
I'm old enough to remember that.
Yeah, and then he bounced out, and it was substantially because I think he felt like he was being exploited by the entourage that had found him in the entertainment industry, and so he returned to his roots in Ohio. But it was funny because I was working, Comedy Central used to be my client back in the day, and when he left, it also happened around the time of the HD TV boom when everybody started getting and Comedy Central had not invested to be in that block because they were like, who needs to see comedy in HD? Well, they had lost 1 million viewers, and so we had been brought in to understand how to re-engage their audience and get the 1 million viewers back. But there was obviously this devastating blow of losing Chappelle's show. But then they got Workaholics, and some good things came from that. And I got to meet those guys. That was cool. But anyway, long story short, Chappelle being in Ohio, back to his roots, enjoying the down-to-earth people of the great state.
That's right. And there's a great bit from the Chappelle show, Oh Dweeds, which is a play on O'Douls, which kind of goofy. I mean, it's very goofy, but the skit is hilarious, and we'll definitely link to it in the show notes. And the whole bit is that it tastes like the Chronic, and yet it's not. That's their slogan. So I like to think that there was a time where O'Dweeds would be thriving in Ohio, but after this election, and hopefully it legalizes, there'll be no need for an O'Dweeds in Ohio. So we'll link to that for those. I'm sure everyone has seen it that listens, but if you haven't, you've got to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, in Ohio they deserve the full test Chronic, so let's get it there.
Let's get it there. And how did we get here, right? So, but apart from Chappelle, and I hope with the election coming up, I don't know how politically involved he is, but it'd be great if he got out there and talked about this stuff just to drive the vote, and we'll talk about why that's important. But the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, which is a bit of a mouthful there, submitted more than 220,000 signatures for the measure last month. But we all remember the state found that they had come up short by 679 valid signatures. So it looked like, after 220,000 signatures, it wasn't going to happen. They were given 10 days to make up the difference, and they ultimately turned in about 6,500 additional signatures. And then the Secretary of State out there said in a letter to the campaign that 4,405 of those final signatures were valid. I don't know, how that works. I mean, 2,000, what is that? That's like 2/3 of the signatures were valid. That 1/3 of signatures not being valid, is it just like kids or something signing? But anyways, the good news is it brought the total to more than 3,000 more than they actually needed to make the ballot, and it's done. It's gonna be on the ballot, and so now it's about getting the vote come November.
Yeah, and this was a heavy lift because they couldn't have duplicate signatures from the prior initiative signature drive. So
wow.
This actually represents a very significant number of people. And yeah, I think people bounce out for, I mean, who knows? I mean, I know when I get shaken down on the street to sign something, you're lucky if you're getting my real name. And it usually is only about an issue that I really care about and I'm ready to be found and have a lot of mail sent to me. But So the fact that you can get people to sign things in this world is actually quite amazing. And then the fact that they hit it above where they needed to by really, in the end of the day, 3,000 is significant. And I remember when I was on the board of MPP and we would really lean in on these signature drives. I mean, this is our first look at kind of exit polling in a way. People signed to
Right.
get this thing on, and they had to do a lot of work to do it, and it represents a pretty significant number. So get this baby on the ballot. This is going to be really exciting. And for those who may not have been around as long as us, I was reminded of the fact that when I was very involved with Marijuana Policy Project, one of the ballot initiatives was in Ohio, and we actually we had abandoned supporting it because it had come up that it was essentially going to be for companies in the state. It was going to be super duper limited, and it didn't seem like it was a very so Marijuana Policy Project was not a business organization, it was a policy organization, and the whole idea was to decriminalize cannabis and to right the wrongs of the drug war. So I think that for that organization, for us, like people who spiritually think or philosophically believe that people should have access to cannabis, that initiative wasn't that exciting, albeit every step forward is a step forward for this industry. This initiative is much more inclusive, and we're going to talk about it, but that one lost by quite a bit in 2015, but that was also because there were many people in the industry who were actually not supporting it, but were against it. So this is a very different complexion, and a lot has changed. I mean, think about 2015. There
Yeah.
was such a small number of adult use markets at that point, and now we've come so far. So there's a lot of ground covered on this, and frankly, there's a lot of economic data to support why this is a good idea for states to open these programs. And again, there's also a lot of social studies done about the potential downside of it, which is essentially nothing. Opening cannabis in the markets mainly has a net positive impact on society.
Yeah, you're right. 2015 was a long time ago. I mean, 2014 is when Washington opened, Colorado opened, even though they'd voted on it in 2012, right?
Right.
Um,
And Alaska, don't forget.
and yeah, right. Amazing though, that it was even on the ballot back then. So you're right; it has come a long
Hmm.
way. And I know Ohio is somewhat of a purple state, right? So could be a great win for the industry should they come across the line. So if they were to, basically what the legal market looks like is like many. I mean, there's not a lot of details on everything, like total structure of it, but there will be a new division of cannabis control that's going to oversee licensing, compliance, standardization. Pretty common, right? Everyone's got their cannabis control department. There's going to be a 10% sales tax applied to sales, which is
Yep.
a nice low tax rate, and I think a very reasonable tax rate. You're probably going to still get the sales tax on top of that, but
Yep.
a 10% tax seems fair. I mean,
It's very
I think
approachable.
yeah, exactly. So we will see, what how that plays out. But the money, instead of going to like some states have it going to like schools and stuff. Right now, the proceeds will fund the Cannabis Social Equity and Jobs Program to support individuals impacted by previous marijuana-related legal actions. Is how they're talking about it. We'll see. It's always a fair amount of money. I think Colorado just said that they made more in tax revenue on cannabis than alcohol by a long shot.
Hmm.
Um, so there might be enough money to go around. But I thought that was kind of interesting that they've kind of set aside the proceeds for those that were directly impacted by the war on drugs. Just a bit different than other
Yep.
markets. And then from Michigan, Michigan as a parallel, Michigan, a border state, to Ohio, did 325 million in taxation in 2022. So that's kind of what they're thinking it's going to look like. But I would say, if we use Michigan as a proxy, it's going to take a while to get there. It's not going to be,
Hmm.
the second it gets legalized, or maybe the year after. These things just depends on the market. We've seen great progress with places like Maryland, places like Missouri that were actually pretty turnkey, taking the medical turning on adult use. Maybe Ohio will look like that, and there's a pretty good medical footprint there now. But these things take time to develop. But assuming it's at a mature market and it's operating efficiently, I think it's going to be close to a $3 billion market, about $2.8 billion, and that's really looking at the per capita spend in Michigan with a similar population. Although Michigan is actually a smaller population than Ohio with 10 million
Uh-huh.
people, and Ohio is about 12 million people. So there's more people in Ohio, which is great. And Ohio is kind of surrounded by places that have limited access, places like Kentucky, places like Indiana, um, even Pennsylvania, still medical, right? So,
And New York.
and New York, right?
I mean,
So
let's be honest. Like, I was just with a bunch of Buffalo people last weekend, and they do not have access to legal cannabis like they should at this point because there are not enough stores open. So there you go.
yeah, and who knows when, right? I think that I just saw this morning maybe that some of those licenses that got paused are going to be available to open, but not nearly enough. I mean, we're talking like 30, so New York's got a long
Yeah.
way to go. So yeah, definitely a desert right now for access. So $3 billion market, I think that's reasonable, right? And 10% sales tax would drive about 300 million in tax revenue in a mature
Yep.
market.
Don't forget there's some big universities and great colleges there, like Oberlin, the Arts College, and of course, as our friend Tahira went to, where was she at? Ohio State. I mean, those are
Right.
big cities unto themselves, and a great consumer demographic for cannabis, of course, above 21. But all good there. And I think, there I saw that and I agree with you on the size. I think this is a very exciting market. And so I'm really looking forward to where this goes. And I think Michigan is a very good analog to it, albeit Michigan did have a much more lively and open caregiver network, which actually made the opening of the market a little more difficult. But they've gotten their arms around it, and it's a very interesting market to be participating in. So it's a little different on that side, but I know Ohio has medical, but Michigan's program was very, very like quite different and quite open. So this will be interesting, and I know. Um, we're, Anything about that, or should we move on to the probability of this baby? What do you think?
I mean, we could talk about the operators that are there
Oh yeah,
kind of
we should do
currently.
that.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
Yeah.
do you
So
want to
who's in
cover that?
Ohio right now? Yeah, yeah. So who's in Ohio right now? So we've got thanks to our friend on Twitter at Canalorian, which is one of my favorite little Twitter handles to follow because he always or she or they put up these great little graphs. And this is funny. I used this little insider tip on ways to think about this industry when I heard rumors that there was a big potential acquisition or merger with Cresco. I used the Canalorian's table of retail assets to try to figure out who it could be, and I called the ball on it being Columbia Care. Although we know that has since has not moved forward, but this is a really handy little table. I retweeted it this week, and we'll link it here. But I was going through the store representation, and this is only public companies, but this is where you have the best window into things because private companies are harder to gain access to. So, you've got Curaleaf in there, you've got Verano, you've got Columbia Care, Green Thumb. Cresco has a footprint. Jushi, Ascend has a footprint. Acreage has a footprint. Mary Med has a footprint. And then these other two, Vexed and I guess Body and Mind. But so those are some of the public companies that have a retail footprint, and then we know that many of them also have back end vertical. So this is just the public companies that have a footprint. And I remember when I was involved in Ascend, we had pretty nice geographic reach in that state. So, hopefully the new cannabis commission that is formed will take a more active approach in terms of helping this whole thing to transition over. Maybe something more like how Missouri handled it, or even Maryland got these things going, but that it won't go because it's always the exciting thing is to see it get voted in. And then it's always just like a very exciting moment. And then we have to watch the implementation of it. And I think we can all say what's worked well and what has not worked well at this point. So hopefully that group will pay attention to those fact patterns and get this going.
Yeah, that's
You
a
know,
massive
yeah,
list. Like, is anybody
yeah.
missing from the publicly traded that have a footprint? I guess maybe
True
True
Leave
Leave.
does not have
Yeah,
one. Air does not have one. Schwaz does not have one, which is not surprising. Schwaz is more of like a single state or like regional operator. Same thing with some of these other companies. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the biggest, yeah, Tilt is another one that has a pretty solid footprint but does not have it there. So, yeah. So this is yeah, we've got some good coverage on that front, but I know there's also private companies doing things there for a while on the medical side. Um so we'll see. Um the jobs data came out this morning and what it showed is actually it's the lowest what was the fact they fell in July by more than expected. So this is, showing that labor demand is cooling. And it like I said, it cooled more quickly than what they had anticipated. So, the market's like that because then they think the Fed won't hike again. I think more locally in terms of what that means in terms of people and their lifestyle and their ability to support themselves. But if I know the governor is not on the face of it in support of legalizing cannabis, but in election cycles, things that matter are jobs and
right.
taxpayer dollars. And so the thing about cannabis is that it is expanding. And while some of these organizations have gone through, I would say, like right sizing of headcount, you have to get people into these companies when you go through the transition, just like what we've seen in these other markets. Like, Missouri was an 8x growth rate from what the medical sales were on the baseline. And Maryland was looking more like a 3x. I mean, these things require human beings at this time to get these companies fired up and at this level. So, I just wonder if politicians will start to change their minds in the face of some of this data and what it could represent for their constituents going into the fall.
Yeah, totally. And to the point about like the MSOs and there's obviously private companies. I think it's like roughly 100 or so um, s- dispensaries, and
Hmm.
Ohio does publish the list of dispensaries with certificates of operation. So it's a good footprint, and I could see it. Looking at the success of a Maryland, looking at the success of a Missouri that took a medical program and turned it on versus wiping it out, doing a lottery, starting over, which I just don't. That's certainly not going to be the case. But or marginalizing medical, like New York did with those first medical groups, and trying to grandfather them in at a later date. But if they look at Maryland, look at Missouri, and the success there, I hope that they repeat that, because it does look like, with a lot of private companies and obviously a lot of MSO coverage, but there are a lot of private in here, and it would make sense to just flip the switch, and that's just great for accelerating the category for us, right? Because we're seeing good growth coming out of Maryland, good growth coming out of Missouri, and that stuff lifts the industry top line. When markets like California continue to contract and have challenges. So fingers crossed that that's the case. And yeah, the governor certainly is not up for this, and that's not uncommon. There's plenty of markets where that's been the case. Um, you know, Republican and Democrat governors that have been against it, like Delaware, right, famously. But about 60% or 58% of Ohioans support the move, is what is reported. So that's pretty good. But I would say, historically, this is going to be like a midterm election, right, in November this
Hmm.
year. And
Correct.
yeah, I mean, even though we're already talking about the presidential election, which is already exhausting, it's
Um,
coming. It's not this November, right? So, um, that's next November. Well over a year from now, and those elections generally have been more successful for cannabis legalization. If we just look at the last midterm, um, there was a lot of failures of legalization, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with turnout and the types of people that go to the polls. And I think with a presidential election, it drives obviously a much larger turnout, probably a stronger youth vote that comes out in those types of elections. And I am a little nervous about how this is going to go, given that it's midterm here. But Ohio's in the news, right? Just like a month ago, in a big way, because of this issue 1 that was a Republican or GOP based legislation that they did a special election on, and this issue 1 was related to making it tougher to protect abortion rights, and the voters turned out in a big way to shut this down, right? So
Yeah.
it shows that when there's something that people care about, they'll come out. And this is actually coming back around on the November ballot because they're continuing to try and limit abortion rights there. And if this issue 1 was any indication, it's enough to drive voters, just like a presidential election is enough to drive voters, because this is a pretty sensitive topic, for a variety of reasons. So they're going to bring the voters out for abortion rights, and you got cannabis legalization right next to it, right? And so I could see, more of a progressive turnout, which historically tends to, drive legalization here. And so maybe it does have a good chance. I think without that, I would be a little anxious, right? You've got this purple state. You've got a lot of conservative bent, to the state. You've got a governor who's not for it. You've got a program that, struggled to get, well, initially to get enough ballots, obviously was able to get plenty of signatures for it getting on the ballot. Now has plenty. But I think, it's a little stacked against it. But with this abortion coming out again in November, I think we're going to see incredible turnout. I think you're going to see headlines about Ohio turnout in this election, just like you saw for issue 1. Like, I don't remember the last time I've read about Ohio voter turnout, apart from maybe, when they're doing, selecting the president, the primaries. But apart from that, you don't really hear about it. But it was all over the news, and so I think this will happen again this November, and cannabis legalization's right there, and we're gonna have another legal market that's pretty purple, pretty red at times, and maybe will help continue to tip the scales in our favor federally.
Yeah. And I think, that the issue 1 tends to skew progressive, but we know from polling data that cannabis does cut across the aisles, and it actually pulls in people from both sides of both party lines. And, at this point, I don't feel represented basically by anybody in government. But the one thing about this issue but issue 1 will bring younger voters to the poll. And this issue does skew very popular, no matter the party affiliation, in younger voters for cannabis. So that is very good. And so I think one of the things that I've come to realize, if you step back and reflect, like, we're coming up on 10 years in this business for Poseidon in October, and it's like, if I reflect over what has gone well and what has not gone well politically for cannabis, what has gone well has been the state to state opening. And the thing that I can't get over is that when it's left to the will of the people, cannabis tends to win. It's the politicians who don't get it. And so I'm hopeful that we see that for Ohio. I'm hopeful for the people in Ohio, because they are due for some quality chronic, and I hope we can get it there. And they don't need that O'Dweeds anymore. And we'll see. So I'll be watching very, very closely in November for this one.
Yeah, and hopefully Dave Chappelle is as well.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.